I know the white belt can be a confusing and frustrating belt, trust me. In the 8 years it's taken me to get to brown belt, I've made just about every mistake there is to make, and I've made them all the hard way. So with that, these are the white belt tips. If I could give myself, I would give myself. Let's jump in. Training frequency. How often do I need to be training to see results? For me personally, I came in with a wrestling background, so I had a somewhat better understanding of my way around the human body in a grappling scenario than people who are coming in as straight up beginners. Even with that, if I was coming once, even twice a week, I really wasn't retaining any of the knowledge that I was gaining, which some might say is a waste of time. I think that with enough exposure, you can begin to retain the material. But for me, I found that the sweet spot was 3 training sessions a week. I really enjoyed putting a day between each training session. So if I could come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I love that. And honestly, I needed at least 2 classes and an open mat. If I could get all 3 of those as classes, that's great. And if I could get all 3 of those as classes with some sparring, even better. But I think 3 sessions, however you want to split it up, I would say at least 2 classes. And then if the 3rd session's an open mat and you can work on the things that you've been practicing all week, I think that's gold. Even presently, I'm training at least 3 days a week. If I'm going to compete, I will ramp that up to 5 or 6 days a week. But 3 days is really all I need to keep fresh, continue to learn new things, and stay on my game. Obviously, the more you train, the more you learn, the more you retain. But I do think that some people have this inflated idea that you have to train 5, 6 days a week, sometimes twice a day, to get the best result possible. You have to keep in mind there is a tipping point. If you're training too much and you're burning yourself out, you're going to lose motivation. You're not going to be excited to train as much as you would be if you're training less, right? At least 3 times a week. Everybody's a little bit different, but from my own personal experience and seeing many new white belts come through the door, I think that 3 days a week or 3 training sessions a week is a great starting point. And I just want to take a quick break to give my sponsors, X Martial, a shout out. Not only does X Martial have the highest quality no-gi gear for adults and kids on the market, they also provide workout equipment and training tools, everything from resistance bands to grip work to abdominal work. You name it, they got it. On top of all that, they also have the X Martial Charity Initiative, where they help bullied or underprivileged people get help with their training fees and free gear. You're not gonna find a higher quality company out there. So if you wanna look as good as me and probably even better, get over to xmartial.com, use my code IRONWILL to save yourself some money, and look good while you sharpen your skills. All right, well, I think that covers it. Let's get back to the video. Tip number 2, gauging your progress correctly. I think as a white belt, we forget, or sometimes we're unaware, that this chapter of Jiu Jitsu, this part of our journey, is meant for us to lose, and we lose a lot. Because of this, we do build a really good defense here. This is where many of our roots and our foundational elements that create our defensive game are created. But because of that, we're not submitting a lot of people, maybe not even anyone right away, right? And that can feel a little demotivating. Sometimes people come to jiu-jitsu and they just get beat up, right? They lose and they lose and they lose some more, and they're deflated and they feel like they're unmotivated to continue forth, when really this is a great place to be. If you're a white belt and you're focusing too much on submitting other people, I don't think you're focusing on the correct thing. As a white belt, let's not even worry about submissions just yet, right? What I would recommend you focus on is getting tapped less. If you're a white belt who's hyper-focused on submissions, I would argue that you're focused on the wrong thing. And sometimes that's not even a great way to track our progress, because we aren't seeing submissions. We don't know a lot of submissions. We're in positions where there's many opportunities for those submissions, but we just don't know how to launch it. We don't know how to initiate it. So instead of being so hyper-focused on your submissions, why don't you focus on getting tapped less, right? You go to training and you get tapped 10 times. Instead of being so hyper-focused on the fact that you didn't submit anyone, why don't you focus for next time getting tapped 9 times, and then 8 times, and then 7 times. Work your way all the way down until you're not getting submitted at all during class. That is a beautiful thing, and that shows progress. Another one you could do, especially for those of you who are submission driven but may not know very many yet, is paying attention to when you recognize opportunities for submissions. This is part of the developmental process of jiu-jitsu. You may learn the armbar right away. You may learn the triangle right away, but you have no idea how to get there or how to finish it, right? But you know you're getting better when you start to see those opportunities mid-roll. An opportunity will come and go and you'll be like, that was a triangle. I could have hit that. That's progress right there. Because when you first come in, remember how much you didn't know, right? You didn't know where the submissions were. You didn't even know where the opportunities for the submissions were. And now you're starting to recognize, hey, I could have hit an armbar there. That in and of itself is progress, and don't take that lightly because you're already miles ahead of the general public once you can get to that point. Another aspect to pay attention to that will tell you you're progressing in jiu-jitsu is you're feeling less panicked during sparring. I'll never forget, even with a wrestling background, grappling with another person who knows submissions really just would elevate my energy levels, really would elevate my panic level. And anytime my opponent got my wrists, got my ankles, anything, I'd be exploding. I'd be trying to bench press and deadlift my way out of everything using nothing but power, rage, and aggression. And that wasn't coming from a place of dominance. That was coming from a place of panic. And the sooner that you can get that under control, bring your energy levels down and be more focused and careful with your movements, that shows progress. What I find most interesting is now that I've been training for a good amount of time and new people come in, I recognize this in other people. I recognize the panic that they're putting onto themselves, right? In jiu-jitsu, this is a very safe butt whooping, right? You tap and it's over. It's not like Muay Thai or any of the other striking arts where if you get hit too hard, you might have to sit down, you might have to take a knee. And here, if something starts to hurt, you can tap. You're totally fine, right? Especially if you've got really good training partners, which is obviously always something you want. But you're safe. You don't need to panic. But for those of us who've never been in a fight, even in a grappling match, it can really elevate that adrenaline and that fake necessity to explode out of everything. You get that under control, you've come a long way, and it really speaks volumes of you and your jiu-jitsu. And lastly for this tip, which piggybacks really nicely off the last one, is you're noticing that you're finishing your matches with more energy. I've always said that jiu-jitsu is chess with body parts. It's chess with energy expenditure. Once you learn to control your panic and you learn to calm down, you can be more strategic with your movements. You can be more tactical with your movements. And because of this, you will conserve energy much more efficiently than you were when you were exploding out of everything, bench pressing out of everything, deadlifting out of everything, right? This calm, quiet mind leads to better energy conservation, and because of this, you are progressing in jiu-jitsu. So I would always say pay attention to your energy levels, and if you're in a tournament setting, right, you don't want to use all your energy in the first match. You want to have energy to get to the finals and not only just get there, but win. Chess with energy expenditure. A calm mind really brings the best results, and the second you notice that you're doing that, that's progress in jiu-jitsu. All right, tip number 3 is a big one. Stop holding your breath. I think this comes from probably a weightlifting background. A lot of times when we're doing squats or maybe even deadlifts, we hold our breath and we brace to keep our torsos rigid. Once we go through the motion, we exhale and begin to reset. This is not something that translates to jiu-jitsu very well. You have to remember that our muscles require oxygen to operate optimally. And not only do they require it, they require a constant flow of this. So if you interrupt that constant necessity of oxygen, you will gas out. I can still vividly remember being a white belt, trying to finish an armbar or trying to finish a triangle choke, and I hold my breath and I squeeze down and I'm holding everything and I'm giving it everything I got, and then I finally realize that I'm holding my breath, I breathe, only come to find out that I'm gassed out and my whole entire body feels weak. In doing this, you're giving your opponent the best thing you ever could have given him, and that's an easy win. I don't know if you've ever rolled with anybody who is completely gassed out, but it's quite easy to do what you want with this person because they have no fight left in them. Now, while you work on avoiding holding your breath, another thing I would recommend working on is also paying attention to your opponent's breath. They will tell you a lot about their game, their strategy, and their abilities just by their breath work alone. I'm constantly listening for if they are breathing deeply and quickly. Are they out of breath? Are they breathing calmly? Are they holding their breath at all? I'm learning in those short, precise moments that I'm listening about where my opponent is with their energy expenditure and where they are possibly with their mental game, right? A lot of people mentally weaken when they gas out. Physically, of course, but mentally as well. I've been, for full transparency, so gassed out that I just wanted to lose. This is something that I don't think a lot of people talk about because it's embarrassing and it doesn't feel good, but if any of you have ever been truly gassed out, you know what I'm talking about. The beautiful thing about this is that in jiu-jitsu, you have the opportunity to work on this, right? Versus people who don't train, who will never get a chance to work this in their everyday lives. You're putting yourself miles above people who don't train just because you get to work and improve on this. So as you work on eliminating holding your breath from your game, also work on listening to your opponent's breath because it will tell you a lot about where they're at in that match. Next tip is an easy one and it seems like common sense, but for some reason it's so easily forgotten and just overlooked most of the time, especially from white belts. When your opponent gets a grip on you, whether it be your lapel, your gi sleeve, your wrist, your neck, you have to address that immediately. Grips are the initiation of a submission, essentially. It's the initiation of a progression towards a submission. They're looking for dominance, they're looking for setups. Ultimately, these things will lead you down a road where you're submitted. If your opponent is grabbing your wrists, grabbing your gi, getting collar ties, and you're not addressing those right away, you're doing your opponent a favor. If anybody gets your gi, you got to strip that grip. They get your wrist, strip the grip. They get their hand around your neck, duck out. You always have to address the grips. Again, so simple and effective, but also so necessary. You want to give your opponent an advantage, let them have the grips they want to have. They're not grabbing for no reason. There's a reason behind every single point of contact, especially in jiu-jitsu. So address those immediately, and I think you'll notice you start doing a lot better right away. Last but not least, learn to back off. A lot of new white belts come into sparring with a lot of forward pressure. And in fact, as a brown belt, I'm almost counting on that forward pressure, that nonstop bulldog forward pressure. This is why a lot of wrestlers coming into jiu-jitsu struggle with getting triangled all the time. Jiu-jitsu is very dynamic. You push, I pull, you push, I push, you pull, I pull. It's not one-dimensional. It's not two-dimensional. You have to be 360 degrees with your jiu-jitsu, right? If you're constantly pushing forward and you're finding that you're running into submissions pretty frequently, it's because that tactic isn't a great one. A lot of what happens in jiu-jitsu happens at an angle, right? If you come at me head on and you give me constant pressure forward into me, you're gonna get thrown. If we're on the ground, you're gonna run into submissions, guillotines, triangles, whatever it may be, arm bars even, sweeps. That forward pressure is good. There's a time and place for it, but you can't just spam it, right? And this is something that a lot of white belts do. I did this because of my wrestling background. I was constantly pressing forward, constantly looking for work, constantly looking to apply pressure to my opponent. But, submission grappling, jiu-jitsu, you're really giving your opponent a favor there. So learn when to pull back. A lot of my triangle defense, which came from my white belt days, happened when I stopped pressing forward. I learned to sit back, keep my posture up, staying out of range of the triangle, right? I would constantly push in and drive, and then I'm getting choked. So just remember, you can push forward. There's a time and place for that, but you also have to know when to turn it off. One of my favorite analogies from Helio Gracie way back in the day is when he talked about the mousetrap and the mouse. The mousetrap doesn't chase the mouse around. It sits and waits for the mouse to make a mistake, and then it takes it, right? When you are driving forward constantly, you're the mouse, and your opponent is the mousetrap. You're falling into their trap. I think that if you find that you start pulling back a little bit and you let your opponent make some moves, this is where you can start recognizing mistakes in their game and you can capitalize on that, becoming the mousetrap yourself. If you're constantly driving in, you're asking for trouble. And I think that the minute you stop doing that, you'll see how beneficial it truly is. At the end of the day, we're all on our own separate paths in jiu-jitsu, and what works for me might not work for you, might not work for the next guy. But there does tend to be some transfer all over the place. So if you've been training jiu-jitsu for a while, or maybe you're a white belt and you have some tips that you would have given yourself 2 months ago, drop those in the comments, guys. People read those, and I love when you guys share your knowledge because it really does help. So with that, you know how we like to end them, sometimes backwards, always forwards. I'll see you in the next one.